We are in a late model JK with an LT1 10-speed. What can I say? In my opinion, it's really the top of the line in the engine conversion world. Yes, there's more powerful stuff out there, but come on. A near 500 horsepower LT1 with a 10-speed makes the heavy JK, even like this on 40s, feel like a Ferrari with 40s. An old friend dropped by the shop, so you're going to see him in the test drive. The Jeep we're in is heavily modified. Motec did a lot of work beyond the engine, and we do that work if you want axles or rock rails or whatever. Of course we do all that. This Jeep got Dynatrac axles, front and rear. I believe it's a Dana 80 in the rear and a Dana 60 in the front. We got PSC hydraulics, and it is the full hydraulic setup. I did want to mention something a little bit about that. If you guys want to run the XD box, and I've had a lot of requests to do that, you could probably do it with the LT1 with no problem, because that space down there is left open. On the LS engines, that's where Jeep puts the air compressor. So that's where we put the air compressor on the LS, and there will be an interference. You can run a passenger side lower air compressor mount. There's a couple of them out there, the Dirty Dingo, the Allen Grove, and they work, but the reason we did the billet drive was to put everything back where it was, so you could use the stock AC lines and you have no interferences. If you put the AC compressor on the passenger side, you're probably going to end up having to make your own AC hoses, and you might smack it with the upper control arm depending on the lift, and it's going to be tied up to the frame. The other thing I don't like about the GM drive is the power steering pump being shoved up against the power steering gear and running a reduced size pulley. With our billet setup, you put everything right back where it goes, all stock components, all stock lines and hoses. It's a clean setup. Getting back to the LT1 and the PSC, if you've got a Ram in your Jeep, like the one I'm driving now, in my opinion, it's not necessary to run the XD box. The Ram is taking all the stress, all the strain. If you want to run 37s and have quick steering, then eliminating that Ram is a good thing, and then of course you need heavy-duty steering components. But remember, when you run the XD box without a Ram, the stress is being taken up throughout the steering system. That includes the frame rails, the spindle, the drag link. It's all taken up the strain of steering your Jeep. With the hydraulic Ram, it goes directly to the tie rod, then of course the tie rod's taking the strain, but the stress and everything else is reduced. So we got Dynatrac axles, we've got ARB air system, which controls the axles and allows them to inflate his tires. And we just got a ton of other stuff. I know we got S-Pod type things that we installed, and my guys are pretty good at that. Most of the ones that come in for conversions, the wiring's done very messy and sloppy, and we have to clean it up. So at the heart of this swap is the LT1 10-speed. We all know about the technology, 11.5 to 1 compression ratio, direct injection, continuous variable valve timing. It really is a step above pretty much any of the other V8s that we use in our conversions today. This particular Jeep does have a 10-speed, but the 8-speed is also offered. They're both excellent transmissions. Which one would I get? That's a really hard question to answer because I like them both. I guess I would say if you're not going to go out and thrash your Jeep, the 10-speed may have a slight advantage with the larger tires launching. It is going to shift a little bit more if that annoys you, and gearing has to be proper. With the 8L90, it's almost indestructible. The 8L90 was designed as a heavy-duty transmission. It can take almost 800 foot-pounds of torque. So if you're going to go out there and abuse it, I'd probably say get the 8L90. All of these transmissions need to stay cool. We've got a heat wave going on. Guys with 40s, 37s, heavy Jeeps, blocking, airflow to your grill. You got to keep that transmission cool. So keep a gauge on board. We got an Aeroforce gauge here. I happen to be monitoring fuel trims and knock retard right now, but I'm constantly looking at things like transmission temp, engine temp, air temp. I go back and look at the closed loop values, because in a big heavy Jeep like this, you could be cruising along 75, 80 miles an hour. In fact, we just went through a windstorm, and of course it's a headwind. It seems like whichever way you go, you're in a headwind, and that had put more load on the powertrain. So we could kick into an open loop mode and start dumping fuel just because of the wind, which means slowing down a couple of miles an hour can pick our miles back up. This Jeep drives great. My guys did the setup. I don't even know what it is. I know we got Dynatrac axles. I think we have the Terraflex Arctic arms, and then we got some Evo coilover stuff, or maybe it's King, but Dan spent quite a bit of time, and really I guess it doesn't matter what components you're using as long as they are put where they need to be and set up like they need to be. And this Jeep just drives great on and off road. And while I'm at that point, let me just say, double throwdowns and elite chassis are pretty awesome, and they do give you maximum performance off-road. But if you get a vehicle that's set up properly, and you got a mid-length or even a long arm that is set up properly, there's not a lot you can't do. The Metal Cloak suspension systems with the Duraflex joints really flex. Of course, Metal Cloak has the long arm. Rock Crawler's got their 3-link. There's just so much stuff out there. But what I really hate is when I get into a Jeep, I hit the highway, and it's just all over the place. It's like a toad on ice. And I'm chasing the steering wheel, and I'm crabbing, I'm driving sideways. I got the ABS light blinking because the Jeep's not going straight, the steering angle sensor's freaking out. I've got the brakes prematurely engaging, the ABS that is, because it thinks that I'm skidding. And they're just set up wrong. And when we get these Jeeps in, we spend a lot of time, and in some cases I have to call the customer and say, look, this thing isn't safe. We've got to put X amount of hours into it just to get it safe. I drove one not long ago. It was a 2-door that was lifted 5 inches, 4 inches. It had a stock track bar, and the track bar literally ripped off the rear axle because it was under so much stress. If you're going to lift your vehicle 5 inches, get an adjustable track bar, get a relocation bracket, do it right. You're spending a lot of money to put a V8 in, why not do it right? So I don't really have a category for this video other than to say I'm driving a very highly optioned Jeep, and I've been driving a lot of highly optioned Jeeps, and I just wanted to say that there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way. I can always tell when a Jeep comes in and it's got all sorts of whiz-bang stuff on it out of a Quadratech catalog, or it was over at 4-Wheel Parts, and they've got lights and rock things and just stuff that really doesn't make you any more functional off-road. It's got massive stereo systems with amplifiers everywhere, or it's cut into the ignition circuits for an alarm system. Those are always a happy thing. They're not a happy thing because they cause us all sorts of grief. And then you look at the serious ones, and I'm kind of happy Moby's in the video because Moby, while he has a lot of options, everything on Moby is functional. Obviously, he's got the double throwdown, but if you look at things like the radio and the basic stuff, it's left simple. The skid plates, they're left simple. The suspension's really trick, yes. So that's for performance. But when you start loading your Jeep down with stuff, you just take it to a 4-wheel drive shop and they say, hey, look, here's a new footrest pedal that so-and-so came out with. And hey, what about these grab handles? Hey, and let's get a bar on the dash and mount all sorts of stuff on it. If you need that stuff, okay. But if you don't need that stuff, my advice is leave it off. This Jeep I'm driving, I could jump in and drive across the country. I don't have to chase the steering. It goes straight down the road. It rides smooth enough for my family not to complain. And I've had a couple of Jeeps in the shop recently where my family would not ride in it. It was that rough. And the fact that an LT1 can push a Jeep easily at 90 miles an hour all day means you're not cruising at 50, 60 miles an hour up the grades like I used to when I come up the 15. So if you want to pimp your Jeep out, do it tastefully. Look at what you're going to do. If you're going to be crawling rocks, set it up for rocks. I have a Jeep in the shop with 22-inch rims and really short sidewalls. While that's cool to go through a mall, it's probably not the best setup to crawl rocks. You need some sidewall there, especially when you air down, because that acts as your suspension. When you're off-road, you need that tread to wrap around whatever you're going over, and having a 22-inch rim isn't going to allow it to do that. Everything is a compromise. I got guys with 37-inch tires that are 13.5 inches wide, and they're like bubble gum. You can barely push the vehicle when it's in neutral. These guys love these tires off-road, but then they get in the highway and complain about the mileage. You're going to get one or the other. You're not going to get both. Same thing with suspension. The more floppy you make your suspension, the better it's probably going to crawl off-road, although you don't want to go too floppy, but the more unstable it's going to be on-road. One of the great things about the LT is the lack of compromise. You're still pushing close to 500 horsepower, but you got the drivability of a 5.3 or a stock 3.6. To get that kind of power with a Hemi or an LS, you'd have to cam it or go to a larger displacement engine, or maybe even supercharge it. Here's my advice. Before you do anything to your Jeep, if you got a bone stock Jeep, or you just bought a Jeep, you're gonna pimp it out, sit back and say, what am I gonna do? All right, if you're not gonna be doing a lot of night driving and search and rescue, you don't need 15 light bars around your Jeep. I know it looks cool and it impresses your friends, but light bars also create a lot of drag and they add a lot of complexity for the wiring. Most guys will use a winch, because if you don't use it for yourself, you might use it for somebody else. I've been on this 15 freeway and seen guys get stuck in the snow and the mud and have winched them out. If you get a winch, get a good winch. I've tried the really cheap Chinese winches, and while they might work a couple of times, at the end of the day you pay the price. I've had a Warren winch on my Toyota since the 1980s, and that winch is still functional, and I've used it a lot. Make sure you sync your winch. Make sure it's not blocking the grill. You want a remote for your winch or Bluetooth, whatever, go for it. Otherwise, the good old plug-in cable I think works fine. I guess I'm starting to become a fan of the synthetic cable because of the weight. I was raised on the steel cable, but if you want to save some weight and go high-tech, go for a synthetic winch. I want to say a little bit more about bumpers because I see all sorts of bumpers. Seems like everybody with a garage and a welder makes their own bumper. Some of them look real good, some of them are real good, some of them aren't. Some of them are just really ugly. Some of the ones coming out of China, we need a forklift to put them on and literally drop the Jeep an inch or two because of the weight added to the vehicle. Consider that. If you're going to go out and do some kind of demolition derby, well, get yourself some 500-pound bumpers. However, most of us don't do that. I am a big fan of aluminum armor because you get enough protection for most situations and you lose a lot of weight. And remember, you got to drag that weight around everywhere you go. Whether you're accelerating or decelerating with your brakes, there's more wear and tear and more gas used with the heavier armor. I've seen some guys go full armor where they have it on the quarters and all the way down the side of the doors and all the way under and full skids and never go off-road. So you're dragging around hundreds of pounds of steel for no reason. The front of the JK has a couple of frame horns that have crash protection built into them, so when you hit them they collapse. But I will say this, a properly designed bumper will save you a lot of money in a slow impact. So if you're in a parking lot and the guy backs into you or you hit a wall, whatever, a good strong steel bumper can save a lot of damage, and literally not even damage the vehicle, just damage the bumper and you have to replace it. As far as full skids go, you guys know how I feel. You want to go with a flat skid, you want to go with a full skid, get some ventilation up there, stop melting the parts. I've seen the ARB plastic lines melt and drip off. I've seen the fuel tanks melt, and it is a double wall, but it can literally melt through both of them, and then fuel starts dripping out. Use some common sense. It's 115 outside. You're out there with the air conditioning on, cruising down the highway at 80 miles an hour. There's virtually no airflow getting up into that cavity, and the converters are really hot. They could be pushing 2,000 degrees, and what you have there is an oven. Jeep actually backed off on their skid plates to get some more airflow and to stop trapping debris up above the exhaust. As far as entertainment stuff goes, like radios, if the stock setup's not good enough for you, go ahead and upgrade it, but do yourself a favor. Use electronics that are designed for your vehicle, meaning they plug and play as much as possible. They work over the CAN network. When you start hacking wires and cutting things, it's just trouble. The last thing you want to do is take your Jeep to some whiz-bang stereo shop, pay them a couple $1,000s, and have them rip everything out and start hacking and cutting into all your wires and CAN networks and ignition switches and all that. And while I'm talking about ignition switches, I have solved more intermittent problems by removing alarm systems than anything else. Now, if you have an alarm system like a Fortin or something designed to work within the CAN network, those seem to work pretty good. The lock picks seem to work pretty good. But then you start getting some of these Vipers and stuff where you're hacking into the main circuitry of the WCM and the ignition switch. They've just caused all sorts of problems. I see customers replacing TIPMs to try to fix problems. The problem solver is just to remove the alarm, and I can't tell you how many times I've done that. In fact, I got one in the shop right now I got to do. So use common sense. If you want to have a refrigerator, put in a refrigerator. Put the right circuits in. Run the proper gauge wire for the length that it's going to take to get to the battery. Run proper circuit protection, whether it's a circuit breaker or a fuse. Don't just try to tap into a stock circuit and overload it. And then run the wires correctly. I see guys just tape wires up against the frame and stuff, and I go on test drives, and these wires fall down, and I run over them and stuff. And now, run it properly. Same thing with ARB lines. You got to protect those. You want to get them out of heat and mechanical interferences, like control arms going up and down, drive shafts going up and down. We see it all the time. Same thing with power steering hydraulic lines. There's a lot of stuff moving up there. The drag link, the tie rod, the track bar. And you got to route it carefully. Flex these things out after you do your build. If you have one, use a forklift and look for interferences. Make sure your axles are centered at ride height, because with track bars, if you lift your Jeep up, it's going to pull the axle over to one side. And if it does that, get something to correct it, either an offset bracket or an adjustable track bar. So here's my point. The Jeep I'm driving now drives great. It took a lot of time. It took almost 2 days to set the suspension up properly. It's a mishmash of parts, but it drives great. Don't just keep throwing stuff on your Jeep, because we all know that the Jeep market is a giant market for everything, whether it's radios, grills, bumpers, suspension. We got over 1 million JKs out there, and I don't even know where the JL and JTs are at. But everybody and their monkey is jumping into this market trying to sell you something. Use common sense. Sit back and say, what am I going to do with my Jeep? Okay, 90% of the time I'm going to be on the street. I'm going to take it off-road on trails on the weekend, which is essentially what I do. So what do I want? Well, I wanted lightweight. I do have steel armor, and I'm a little disappointed about that, but at the time when I built my Jeep, it was going to be on the cover of a magazine, and that's what the vendor wanted on the cover. And don't get me wrong, I love it, but the fact is I got to haul around 300 pounds of armor. If I had to do it over today, I'd probably go with some aluminum armor. I run stock skids. I got heavy-duty drive shafts. I've got the Camaro SS fan now. I've upgraded, along with our quad-header radiator. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I do have the 3.5-inch game changer. That's been on there since 2011. I got one of the first game changers out. I got stock radio. I don't have refrigerators. I don't have rock lights. I don't have rock cameras. I don't have that stuff. I just upgraded to 37-inch tires, and the main reason was I do run some trails with some big obstacles. I run the Rocky Gap up here in Vegas quite often. I don't know if you guys know it. Some of you guys call it Potato Ridge, but it's got like these washing machine sized boulders, or the rock garden, and the 37-inch tires just make it easier for me to get over those obstacles without scraping my diffs. So I got 37-inch tires now with 410s, and that kind of leads to good highway mileage, because I'm turning like 1800 RPM at 70, and with that 6.2 LS, I can hit 17 miles to the gallon. Now, I do go 80 miles an hour, but if I slow down a little, my mileage does come up. I always run premium gas because I got a 6.2, and you should. And that's another consideration. You can't just throw any gas you want in your Jeep. If you got a high compression engine, run premium gas. If you got a 5.3 or a 6.0 LS, sure, you can run regular, but what you're going to find is if you step up to mid-grade, you're going to increase your mileage. So if you spend 10% more for mid-grade, you might get 10% more mileage. You got to check on that. So we'll be coming back with LTs and LSs and a bunch of other stuff.